Good morning. My name is Christopher Daner, and I work in the KSU Information Security Office. On behalf of everyone in University Information Technology Services, I welcome you to KSU's 8th Annual Cyber Security Awareness Day. Information security is a shared responsibility among every member of the university community. As recent news reports have highlighted, cybercrime has blossomed into a full-fledged criminal enterprise. Every day presents new challenges and decisions that affect people's sensitive information. From governments to corporations to the average citizen, the responsibility of information security is held in common. 2016 celebrates 8 years of KSU Cybersecurity Awareness Day. This two-day event brings professional experts from the world of law enforcement, private industry, and academia to discuss a wide range of pertinent information security topics. An event such as this doesn't happen without a team of talented and motivated individuals. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to recognize some individuals and organizations that made this event possible. First and foremost, our interim CIO, Lectra Lawhorn, for 8 years, and beyond that though, her leadership and support have really made this event possible and a success. Within UITS Enterprise System Services, Chris Ward and Amos Williams, and everyone on the web development team, they put together our cybersecurity.kennesaw.edu website, and were quick to apply all the updates I kept feeding them throughout the past 2 months. So thank you, gentlemen. From UITS Learning Technologies, Training and Audiovisual Outreach, Matthew Lestar, Jeremy Waltz, and the entire broadcast team for making the live stream on KSU TV possible. Thomas Dale, who does all of our communications. Without him, I would have had a lot harder time with the marketing and campus-wide communications for the event. He truly was a lifesaver. From the KSU Information Security Office, my home team, Stephen Gay, our CISO, Bill Moore, Chris Gaddis, Gary Harris, and Matt Sims. To KSU Events for scheduling the events and getting the rooms set up. Our sponsors, Cisco and CDWG, their generosity basically allowed us to have some wonderful refreshments today and speaker gifts. To our speakers for agreeing to participate and share their knowledge and passion for information security. And finally, but not least, our participants. There are plenty of other things you guys could be doing on a beautiful day such as this. We really do appreciate you choosing it to spend with us. So, our first speaker for today, Brandon Gaudet from website IO. Brandon is a private security consultant that works closely with organizations, both large and small, providing guidance on how to secure infrastructure and assets. Prior to entering into the private contracting world, Brandon was an assistant to the Georgia Tech Information Security Center. In this role, he built and maintained servers, distributed systems, an environment that required close observance of security best practices. These requirements include resistance to attacks by motivated and well-financed actors, as well as quarantine capabilities to contain malware samples researched by the support labs. Through this experience, Brandon has seen firsthand the efforts required to successfully defend networks, as well as the difficulties associated with such defensive efforts. Brandon has always had a passion for technology, a passion which led him to join his high school engineering program after moving from his original home in Canada to the United States. Welcome to America. Brandon started college at the age of 16 and switched his major from engineering to computer science after getting only a small taste of what the world of computer science had to offer. Brandon's interests were further honed when he started working in the computer security during his time at GTISC, giving him the last push he needed to set on the path of helping secure the businesses and services relied upon his country. Brandon is currently pursuing a Master's of Science degree in Information Security and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science from Georgia Institute of Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big warm KSU welcome to Brandon Gaudet.
Thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. I was going to start off with a little introduction about myself, but that was already read. Just to give a little bit more, on top of getting my master's degree right now, I am a private security consultant. So I do mainly web and network pen tests. So for anyone who doesn't know what this means, Companies come to people like me and hire us to attack their network or specific portions of their network depending on the job. And then I take hours to attack it and then deliver a report that says how they can fix all the problems that I found. So I'm essentially hacking their network in order to tell them how to fix it. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to secure a network. This is a topic that's inherently difficult. It is difficult for many reasons. So the first one is that networks are very complex. If you try to think of a network like Google or Microsoft or any big company, they have computers around the world and their environment is constantly changing with new employees, new technologies, new acquisitions. So a network can become very complex very fast. A second thing is politics and bureaucracy always are against a security person. A company's main goal is to make money, and we are only a cost. We're not helping the company make any money. So we're always gonna be put behind other things within the company. The last problem is securing a network. Even just the problem of securing a network is difficult to frame. Who are we securing a network from? How are we going to do this? How are they going to be attacking us? These are all large problems that are very hard to put down on paper and figure out an answer to. I'll also be talking about the traditional approach to solving this and kind of why it doesn't work and why it's not cutting it out and why companies can hire people like me that can still get into their network even though they're using all of these solutions that you see on the internet. And in the end, I will propose a new solution or a new concept or layout of how I think a network should be secured and how we could help with all these problems in the future. So why do I need to be talking about this? This network is the base of our security. So if you think of a company, even in the perfect scenario where one of their employees somehow developed an application that had 0 vulnerabilities. This is never going to happen in real life, but we'll say it actually does. Even when this happens, if it is put on a network that is vulnerable, all the attacker has to do is just not attack the application, but attack the network. And they can get access to the same data that they could have if they would have gotten into the application. So this is an inherent problem that we have in computer science. We build all of our applications off assumptions that what we build them on top of is secure. So, and that assumption is that any application is built on a secure network. So we need to have them. A lot of companies that are older or have had many acquisitions suffer from this problem. They built their networks a long time ago when we didn't have the knowledge we do now on how to actually secure them. And all they've done is acquire new companies and added new things to the network and more applications without ever going back and updating their applications. So they run into the problem that they're now building secure software, but they're putting it on a network that is no longer secure. And then you could see in the news a lot that companies get attacked. And then after getting attacked, 2 weeks to a month later, they come out and say, we fixed the problem and we've kicked all the attackers out of the network. Well, if they built a network that they didn't even know the attackers were there in the first place or couldn't stop them from getting access to the data they were trying to protect, how are they so confident that they kicked the attacker out? I can tell you firsthand that as an attacker, if I get into a network, the first thing I'm going to do is put 3, 4, 5 other backdoors in the network so that if they kick me out from the one I'm in, I just have other ways in. So how can any company go out and say that, yes, these people got in, but I'm very confident they're out? So this is another problem. There's really no proof that these companies can give that proves that the attacker's out. So we're going to try to tackle that today too. The agenda is first I'll talk about the problems that we're having in security. Then I will go over some concepts and terminology that's needed to understand everything throughout the presentation. I will go into detail about the traditional approach and go into exactly why I think all of these different softwares aren't working. And then I will propose my solution. My solution obviously has caveats, so I will explain those too, and then I'll end in conclusion. So the problem. So first, let's define what is network security. This is something that can be defined in many ways, and if you could ask 100 people and they'll all give you a different answer. Today, for this presentation, we're going to use the simplest definition that I can think of. You are a security engineer at a company. It is your responsibility to protect every asset on that network. And that is it. So how you do it is anything, but that's the definition we're going to use. So as I've said, this is a difficult problem. It's difficult for many reasons. First one is it's complex. And our networks are always changing. They change daily in bigger companies, even hourly in other companies. Security is not business driven. We are not the focus of a company. So we will not have the budget or the power to actually make changes in the company that are necessary to secure it. And we're going to have to get around kind of that setback. So who cares about the security? I can tell you as a consumer, if I give my credit card information to Google or Microsoft, I expect that my credit card information will not be used in fraud. So I expect that no one's going to get onto their network and steal it and then use it to hurt me. So this is something we have as a consumer. And as I stated earlier, it's also an expectation that on the application level, our application developers expect that what they're putting their service on is secure. So for them, they care a lot about the security of the network. So let's go over some concepts and terminology. Probably the most basic and biggest concept is the principle of least privilege. The principle of least privilege is that everyone on a network should only have access to the bare minimum they need access to. John in some department, accounting, does not need to have access to your production systems. And this is something that is very important and is a fundamental thing when developing network security. The next thing is the CIA triad. I'm sure most people that are here today have seen this triangle at least once in their life. Most of the time it comes with the talk of what are the balance between the three. Today it's not really going to matter what the balance is. We're just going to explain the three different things. I'll explain them in terms of messaging. So that'll be my example. So when I send a message, if I want to send a message to somebody in the back of this room, I want to be confident that it gets to that person without anyone else in this room reading it. So that would be your confidentiality. Your integrity is that when I give a message to somebody in the back of the room, that somebody in the middle between me and them doesn't change the message and give it to them, so they think I said something that I didn't actually say. And then availability is that the service I'm using to deliver this message is always available to me. This is something that is important. And it needs to be up whenever I need it to be up. So another big trade-off in security is security versus usability. The most secure computer in the world is the computer that has no power connected and sitting in a trash can somewhere. That is, you're never going to beat that security. There's no way to exfiltrate data if it doesn't have power. The most usable computer in the world is the one that's sitting in a public library that anyone on the street can walk into, sit down in front of, and use. As a security person, we want to be able to meet somewhere in the middle. For most of my gigs where I do pen test, we actually try to fix this kind of problem by recommending something called duo two-factor authentication. So this is a real-world example. Duo two-factor is whenever a user tries to log into a system, they have to input their username and password, but then they're also sent a push notification to their phone that all they have to do is open their phone, click accept, and then they can log in. So what this does is add a simple step for the user, so it doesn't hurt their usability of the software. They can still log in relatively easy. But it makes it for attackers like me that I no longer have to guess their username and password. I have to somehow get them to push a button at the exact time I want to log in. So it increases the difficulty as an attacker, but at the same time doesn't really change the usability of a user. So this is what kind of the balance we're looking for. As I stated earlier, a secure network is a difficult problem to even model. So threat modeling is something we use when we can't figure out how to do a problem. It's a systematic way of figuring out how to lay out the problem to solve it. This slide is kind of, we'll be telling you about it, but we'll actually do this later in the presentation. I will go through and try to apply a threat model to securing a network. So now we're going to talk about the common approach. So this is where I said we have a bunch of solutions like antivirus, firewalls, intrusion detection systems. These solutions are very, very good at solving a very specific problem. If I'm talking about intrusion detection system, they're very good at figuring out if I'm changing a specific file on a computer. But what they do is, by taking all of these different softwares and throwing them in a network, we're attacking very specific problems in our network, but we're not attacking the overall problem. If anyone can get around any of these softwares, or finds a way to just attack something that these softwares aren't handling, they bypass it, and now they're left with a very open network that they can do whatever they want in. So even though these are very good at solving specific problems, they're not solving the big problem. And I'll go into each one and explain why. So firewalls. Every company has a firewall. No company these days is going to have a network without one. So what a firewall does is restrict access based off connection metadata. So whenever you make a connection within their network, they're going to figure out whether you should be and then stop you or not. So how this is done is a sysadmin goes into the firewall and puts in rules. So to correctly do this, they put in rules that allow certain connections, and then at the end they say deny everything else. So what this does, it only allows the connections they want to come within their network. But there's a problem with this. So as I said earlier, security is business driven. So what happens when somebody puts a new application inside your network and your firewall starts breaking their application? Well, as a business, they're going to go to your sysadmin and say, hey, I need you to open up these firewall rules so that this server stops crashing. Well, over time, if you keep doing this, well, you're eventually just going to allow all traffic in. You're going to have a bunch of rules before the deny all that say allow this traffic. So you'll eventually be able to just allow all traffic. So this doesn't, it'll, in the initial beginning of putting this, it'll solve problems. But over time, in big companies, especially companies that are starting to acquisition and combine firewalls, they'll eventually have a firewall that is way too open. So even though firewall is a very good concept, it is, first of all, it's driven by business needs, not by security needs. And second, it is used and configured by humans. And we know in security that humans make mistakes, and humans are the most common target of all problems. So yes, they work, and they're going to stop some things, but we can't expect them to prevent everything. Antivirus. So antivirus have even different opinions out there. To me personally, they don't work. So an antivirus is supposed to catch a file, a malicious file on a system, as soon as it's placed on a system. So the way you can do this is very complex, and they can do it in many ways. A simple example of what they do is they use hashes. So every binary has what we call a signature, which is just a hash of the binary itself. So an antivirus will figure out what a malicious file is, because we know it's been used before, take its hash and put it in a list. And whenever a file is placed on your computer, it'll hash the file and search its list to see if a hash matches any of these files. So yeah, you'd think that if I went and stole a malicious file off the internet and started using it, that yes, an antivirus might have it. But what happens if I go in and change one line of code in that binary, and then recompile the binary? Well, now the hash is completely different because the binary is different. So this same antivirus that is supposed to stop this malicious file, all I did was add a line of code that did nothing, and now it no longer sees it as malicious. So this is a very simplistic example, but this is what actually happens. So attackers like me, if I ever get into a network, even if I do trigger it once, that I trigger it because I'm like, all right, they don't have an antivirus, so I'm going to put a file on there, and it triggers and stops me from running it. Well, I'm never going to trigger that again. I now know the antivirus is there, and I just got to go start changing my binaries in order to figure out how to run what I want. So in the end, antivirus will stop your less sophisticated attackers that just take binaries off the internet and start running them on your computer, but it's not going to end up stopping any sophisticated attacker or any criminal organization from accessing and running this file. So the next thing is the data loss prevention. So this tool is used, it's put on the network, and examines traffic and looks for sensitive information. So as it's looking through your traffic, it's looking for things like credit card information or social security numbers, but there's a big problem that lies here. So if I come up, even if you're in a classroom environment, a teacher comes to you and says, I want you to be able to write a program that takes all the traffic I send through it, and you tell me what is sensitive information. I can tell you you're going to have a very difficult problem solving that. This is a big AI problem in today's computer science community that's very difficult to solve. If you right now can think you can solve this easily, I would like to talk to you after this presentation. This is something that is very difficult because we don't really know what sensitive information is. On top of that, even though if we don't know how to classify it, there's easy ways to bypass this. In order to be able to say it's sensitive information, they have to be able to read the information. So what happens if, once I get into your company, I create a tunnel that is encrypted and I start sending data to myself through that tunnel? Well, this data loss prevention system is now going to be reading encrypted data, and it has no clue whether it's sensitive or not. There's just no way it can know. So it ends up not being as useful as it should be. The next thing is either intrusion detection or intrusion prevention device. So these are designed to analyze traffic, just like the one before, and detect malicious traffic, such as a HTTP request that's attempting to open something like Etsy Shadow on a Linux machine. Some file that should really never be opened on that kind of connection. So why is somebody trying to open it? You can detect this as malicious. But this is, once again, you're going to come down to the same problem as you did before. What does malicious traffic look like? So what happens if you think that opening Etsy Shadow is malicious, but then you have a software within your company that does it all the time because it needs to? So are you going to stop blocking that? Because it's what an attacker is going to do, but if your system's also doing it, then which one is malicious? So it becomes very difficult to figure out what is malicious and what is not malicious. Just to clarify more, so an intrusion detection system, when it detects these kind of things, it just notifies on them, where an intrusion prevention system will actually stop the traffic. So that's the difference between the two. But once again, there's trivial bypasses to get around these things. Very strong control that I actually hope most companies will use more is network segmentation. So what this means is when you're within a network, there's actually multiple networks within the network. So what this will do is increase how little an attacker can see. So the opposite of this is called a flat network. If I ever get into your network somehow on a machine, the first thing I'm going to do is look at what else I can find on the network. On a flat network, I can see every machine on the network. So if I just start using Nmap or anything to scan the network, I'm going to see every single machine. So this is, as an attacker, you become very happy because now you can figure out exactly what you want to attack, what's the easiest, and then attack it. On a segmented network, you're only going to see what's within your segment of that network. And then other things are going to be blocked off so that even though if you're on a segment of the network, you're not going to be able to see important things. And we're actually going to use this to heavy use later in order to segment off important machines so that if an attacker gets into a workstation, they can't do anything. So you can enforce these many ways, mainly by firewalls and network infrastructure. Another thing about them, before I go to this next slide, is they, just like firewalls, they tend to get in the way. So you're going to get employees or business needs that say, this is annoying to have to switch networks in order to access this machine. So they're going to get in the way of business needs, which then is going to make it so your sysadmin is going to be told to not use them. The next thing I want to talk about is authentication. So authentication is a way to prove who you are. Most of the time it's broken down into three things: what you have, what you are, or what you know. So what you know is like a password. What you have is some token, that like a key fob, and what you are is like biometrics, so eye scanner, fingerprint. So most of the time these things are used in order to authenticate and prove who you are. The problem is this is only as strong as the type of authentication you use. The best example I can give here is you're trying to log into a VPN or something, and all you have to do is input their username and password. If somebody knows the username and password, does that truly mean they are who they say they are? I can promise you the answer is no. This is a downfall to authentication. You only provide enough authentication to what kind of types you use. So this goes back to, again, which is use something like Duo two-factor, and you're going to be fine. So in the Duo two-factor, yes, I can start brute forcing a username and password. And if I brute force a username and password for a month, say even I'm an attacker that has a month to do this, I'm eventually going to hit a username and password that's valid. It's just what it is today. We can't remember off the top of our heads very, very long passwords, so passwords tend to be very simplified and dictionary-ish. So we can attack them using brute force. But if you just add something like Duo two-factor, not only do I have to brute force it, but at the exact time I brute force it, you have to go and click a button. That makes it much more difficult for me as an attacker to get in. So authentication is great, but it needs to be used in order to protect the assets better, and in a way that actually is going to protect the assets. Another thing that needs to be used more is cryptography. So cryptography is one of the best things in computer science that we have in order to protect data. You don't see attackers or anyone saying, if they're talking about a communication channel where two people are talking to each other, saying, I'm going to go right in the middle of this and attack the cryptography that is in this authentication. No one's going to do that. Everyone's just going to attack the two endpoints because humans are easy. humans are much easier to attack than something mathematically proven like cryptography. So these are it's a very good practice just to use it everywhere. Also, companies over the years have increased their physical hardware. We've made it much better. So yes, cryptography is seen to have a lot of overhead and slow the network down, but our technology has grown exponentially over the last few years, so it actually doesn't take that much longer anymore. So we can still do request in under a second. We can still do in the milliseconds, even if we encrypt it. So there's just really no reason not to use cryptography everywhere that you're doing communication. Obviously, there are specific, very special cases where you can't, but unless that is the case, you should be using it. VPNs, so virtual private networks, what they do is, if the easiest example is just use an example. So in a company, if somebody's working from home, but they need to be their computer needs to act like it's on your company network. So what you do is use a VPN. So that employee is going to log into the VPN, and then their computer, in every sense of the matter, is going to be like it's within the network and on the company network instead of on a personal network. So that's what we use them for. They are very strong and very good choke points in a network security industry. So the biggest problem we find with them on different gigs and attacks is that they're really only used on the external network. So once you're within the network, there's no longer VPNs. So you can, like I said earlier, the networks tend to be flat where you can just get to everything. So if these are such a good and strong choke point, why not use them within the network too, so that if somebody gets in, we can also choke point them getting to critical data. And this is what we'll take advantage of in our future design. So CIMEs or SIMs or Security Information Event Management Systems, whatever name you want to give these things. So what these do is they aggregate all logs and events from all these other systems I've talked about into one location, and then you can notify off of them. So these are great, but what problem you end up having with these is that there's a bunch of false positives. So all these other systems, like firewalls and intrusion detection systems, unless they're configured perfectly, they will contain false positives. They'll detect something malicious when it's not really malicious. So what's happened is when we aggregate all of these into one system, and even if all the other systems are fairly well configured and only produce a few, this system is going to show a lot of errors. So what these systems do is tend to email out when they get an error. So what we're doing with these is training our employees. If I get 50 emails a day, and I worked as a sysadmin, you tend to get a lot that says this is potentially malicious. So say I get, even if you go down to 10, I get 10 daily, and for the first 6 months I worked there, all of these 10 are false. None of them actually came out to be malicious. Well, over time, I'm going to start believing that I'm going to get these emails and they're not going to be malicious. So I'm going to take them less seriously, and then what's going to happen is when somebody does attack, I'm going to act like it's nothing, because I'm going to be like, this is nothing. This is normal, this happens every day, so I'm not going to go investigate. So this ends up causing a lot of problems within how we further investigate attacks. So yeah, if you get a lot of positives, they end up providing little benefit. My favorite control within a network are something called honeypots or honey tokens. So what these do is you're actually attempting to trap a malicious third party that's trying to attack your network. So what you do is you take a copy of something that you think is very valuable in your network, copy it, take all the sensitive data out of it, and then place it there. So what attacker's going to do is he's going to scan your network. So even if you take like a web server and you copy it and you take all the sensitive data out of it and you put it somewhere in an IP address, well, a typical user is never going to go to an IP address. A typical user is going to go on their URL and type in https://domain.com, and that's how they're going to get to your web application. But an attacker, what he's going to do is he's going to enumerate your whole network, and he's going to see, oh, you have a web application on this server that I can't get to through using a domain name. So this, to him, it's going to be like, yes, this could be like your testing environment, this could be really anything but it could be easy for me to get in. So they'll go to it by typing in the actual IP address, which no regular user is going to do this. So then they'll get there, and you'll know that they're now trying to attack you. So what this does, and why they're so great, is whenever somebody actually gets to this, it's normally not going to be a false positive. Because if you put it in a location where a typical user is never going to get there, then the only people that are going to get there are attackers. So what this does is it's a way for you to have something that tells you when an attacker is within your network or trying to attack your network, and you can be fairly confident that it's not a false positive. Honey tokens are the same thing as honeypots, except they're not a whole physical system. So in order to do a honeypot, you actually had to replicate the entire system. A honey token is the same concept, except you use it at a different level. So think about if you have Active Directory domain, and you add a user that has the username admin and the password admin. No one is just going to randomly try to log in and type in those. It's no one's credentials. If no one has those credentials, no one's going to use them. So, but what you are going to catch are attackers using brute force methods in order to try to get in. The admin is something I try every single time. Even before I start brute forcing, I'm going to go to a thing and I'm just going to type in admin because if that works, you're excited. That's something, as an attacker, you now have admin credentials on the website. But what you do is, instead of actually letting them log in, you just block their login and send a notification to your guys, say, hey, somebody tried to log in with this. And here's the IP address they came from. Here's some other data that I could gather. So it's like a honeypot, but it's just used at a different level. So endpoint monitoring, these are used kind of like, you can think of them kind of like a firewall, but except they're monitoring a system. So they're monitoring file changes or OS level events. So they're a good way that once an attacker gets on a system and they start changing files because they want to edit things and be malicious, it's a good way to detect them. But once again, without proper tuning, this causes a lot of false positives. So same example I gave earlier, if somebody hits Etsy shadow or Etsy host or even tries to read it, I'm going to notify on it. What happens if your sysadmin goes on that machine and wants to see what users are on there? The first thing he's going to do is cat Etsy shadow. So, but that's going to be flagged as malicious as long as you have an intrusion detection system on the device. So you're going to end up having false positives, and you're going to train your users and your employees to kind of ignore these things. So unless configured correctly, these can also have problems. So now that I've discussed kind of how the traditional approach works, now we're going to talk about get into more of what I think the solution should be and how we're going to model our problem. Let's first go into assumptions. So all of the assumptions, before you think they're kind of radical and very out there, these are all coming from the perspective of an attacker. The internet is mean. No matter what, if you connect any device you have to the internet, I guarantee you it will be attacked. And I'm talking about being attacked within 24 hours. We have companies like underground things and people that hackers are trying to attack that are constantly scanning the internet, looking for vulnerable machines, because they want to get as much of the machines they can use so they can do like DDoS attacks. So in order to do this, a DDoS attack against a company, they need a lot of machines. They're not going to go buy all these machines, so they're going to infect machines. So what they're going to do is try to just scan the network, and if they see that you put a device on the network that is vulnerable, they have a known vulnerability, they're going to get into it and use it. So most of the time, if you go anywhere in a secure network, only do this in an educational kind of place, in a secure, very secure network, and you place a known vulnerability on a server and put that server on the internet, I guarantee you people will be trying to log in or trying to pop that vulnerability within 24 hours. And most of the time, if it's known vulnerability, they will get in. This is just common. So we're gonna assume that there's always people attacking and always people trying to get in. The next thing is we're gonna not trust our neighbors. So it is a common practice to think that if we're on the internal network, if you log into the KSU network, you're safe. You're safe, right? There's no one on the internal network of a company is going to try to attack you. We are throwing that assumption away. There could be many reasons for an internal attacker to attack you, or just there could be somebody who's already got in on the external network and an attacker is just trying to pivot on the network. A pivot is just somebody that's trying to get into more machines once they're already on one of the machines in the network. So there could be always an attacker trying to pivot. So it is normal to assume that you're secure once you're on the internal network. We're actually going to throw that assumption away and assume we're insecure. So the next thing we're going to assume is the things we trust will fail. As I've already explained many reasons that these systems are not perfect. So we can't trust that anything is perfect. If you look at any system, like take for example the Bash vulnerability that came out in the last few years. That vulnerability has been on Bash for 20 plus years. But companies have been trusting Bash ever since. So companies were relying on a language that had a vulnerability that people could take advantage of for anywhere in the world for 20 years before people knew about it. So our assumption we're going to use is that there's always something on our network that has that vulnerability. Oh yeah, so there's backdoor services, compromised networks. There's many reasons why this should be an assumption. I just gave one example. Our tools will fail. So as I said earlier, there's lots of bypasses to these tools. If you'd like to talk to me after this talk, I can give you even more reasons that I can bypass these tools every day. I do it in my job. And we could also bypass these access controls. So we're going to assume tools will always fail. So first of all, we're going to log and monitor everything to make sure that we have logs and basketball lists, but we're also going to assume that our logging and monitoring will also fail at some point. It can either be turned off by the attacker or might not catch certain things. There's many reasons, but we're also going to assume that that can potentially fail at some points too. So this is, as I said earlier, internal threats happen. There's many reasons for malicious third-party attackers that work for organizations that just want to attack people to attack you. But there's also reasons for an internal somebody within your company to attack you. Think of a company like Google who has thousands of employees. Who's to say that one of those employees doesn't have reasons like money or any other kind of motive to attack Google from the inside? So we're also going to assume that some of our attackers are coming with access, that they're coming after us with known information about our network and that have already access to a certain set of our machines. So we're going to take that into consideration. This is a very unfortunate thing to have to make an assumption about, but in most cases it ends up being true. We're also going to assume 0 days are a thing. So as I explained with the bash, so anyone who doesn't know, a 0 day is a vulnerability that has not been made known to public. So if you think of any vulnerability that you've ever heard of, at one point it was a 0 day. The 0 day is the first day that it became known to public that this vulnerability existed. So we're going to assume that applications within our network have 0 days, so that at any point we could think that something is safe, but it's not. Somebody has a 0 day on it. A good example of this is recently, a set of attackers released an NSA tool, and then they wanted people to donate bitcoins in order to release more tools, but that's besides the point. They released a tool, and what this tool did is it was used by the NSA, and what it did is it used a 0 day vulnerability in a Cisco VPN device. These Cisco VPN devices were used worldwide by big and large companies everywhere. It's a very common VPN device. But this tool used a 0 day on that device in order to completely take over the network. So we had a 0 day on a device that a lot of companies use, and no one knew about it. So even just attacker getting to this vulnerability means they could take over a network, and that is a scary thing, but we're going to assume these things exist. Security is not business driven. As I've stated earlier, we are not making the company any money. So we're going to assume that everything we do is going to be without the budget we need and without the authority that we need to do it. We're always going to have people over our heads that are going to prevent us from doing what is needed to be done to secure a network. So some of the takeaways from this: external networks must be hardened. Compromise can occur anywhere. Authorized access will be abused. That includes external and people within our organization. People will gain authorized access, and then our tools will fail. So these seem like very rough assumptions, and it seems like I can never secure a network if these are my assumptions. We believe we can. So the foundation of our design. So first of all, we're going to use a tiered network. So we're not going to use these flat networks where whenever somebody gets in, they can see everything. We don't want to assume this. Then we're also going to assume that we have a tier network. Our outermost tier that most people will be in is always compromised. We will assume there is always a machine within that tier that is compromised. Then we will take our business critical applications and segment those off from that tier, so that even though that tier is compromised, they can't get to our business critical data without getting through another VPN or gaining more access. And then even beyond that, we will take the data that backs those applications and tier them off from that application. So even if they somehow get into our applications, like our web server, the server that we have, the data that's backing them is still segmented off again, where they need even additional access in order to get to. So the next thing we're going to do is have realistic expectations of our tools. So we're not going to expect that our tools are going to sit there and prevent attackers from getting in. We're going to assume that they're going to fail. Hopefully not before they tell us an attacker's in there, but they're going to fail. So none of our tools are ever going to completely 100% prevent an attacker from getting to our network. As I've stated, it's my job to get past these defenses. I would be out of a job if this wasn't possible. So auditing and authority, like auditing. So we're going to put very, very, very good auditing on our authentication. So Joe from accounting should not be logging into a production server at all in the first place. But even if he is allowed to for some odd reason, he should not be logging into that server at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. He's not working. There's really no reason for him to be there. So we want to be able to alert on these kind of behaviors. An attacker is not going to be able to always choose which user he's going to be able to authenticate against. It's whatever ones he finds. So we're going to, if anything seems suspicious, we're at least going to alert on it and make sure that we have things in play to go investigate and make sure, because all it takes is a phone call. Hey, you're obviously up. If you're not up, then there's an attacker in our network. So all you got to do is call them and say, hey, did you just log in? No. Well, there's an attacker. Yes. Okay, you're good. So we're going to have these into place so that we can catch these kind of malicious traffic. So the next thing is we said honeypots are great. So we're going to give attackers a lot of ways to notify us they're there. We're going to give them a lot of footholds and a lot of different things that they can attack that look very, very good to them and juicy targets in order to, so that we can know that they're within our networks. So we're going to use these to our advantage. We're going to put them where regular users will never hit them, but we are going to use them. And then we're going to closely monitor our segmented network. This one is probably the most difficult. As people in security, if you ever get into the workforce, you'll realize that you can never do what you want. So what we're asking for here is something that's very simple. All we want is to have one choke point within our network. And we want that choke point to be that we control which services get put on the secure part of our network. Remember, we're saying the outer part of our network is already compromised. So all we want to be able to do is control which services go from the outer part of our network into our secure part. The way we're going to do this is we're going to ask that anyone that wants their application within a company to get put on the secure part of our network gives us documentation of what it does, how it does it, so we can make sure it's better secured, and that we can audit the application. This will prevent a lot of the initial things that scare and detriment and let the attackers get in. And what we're going to do, if they do this for us, is we're going to provide guarantees that the network they're sitting on is not going to be attacked. So we're going to provide the guarantees that if their application is secure, that our network is secure, and that attacker will not be able to use our network in order to get access to their application. So that's the kind of guarantees we're going to provide, but we need this choke point. This is something that is very critical and needed. We need to have the authority to at least have one choke point that we control. Without this, people over your heads are always going to tell you to do something smaller, and your security is going to be hurt by it. So the last thing we're going to do is have redundancy. So we already said everything will fail. So we're going to make sure that if one thing fails, that there's at least something else that can potentially catch or trigger the attacker. So we're going to use this everywhere. We're going to use redundancy in all of our systems and all of our logging and everything. So another thing I wanted to just catch on, I think I missed it. We're going to use all of the tools I mentioned earlier. So don't think that we're going to not use these tools that I said are not vulnerable. What we're going to do is we're going to treat them as tripwire and not as something that's actually going to prevent the attacker. We're going to treat them as something that attacker is going to fall over, and that's going to notify us the attacker's there, so we can send an appropriate team in to kick them off the network. We're not going to assume that they're going to prevent them, but what we're going to do is we're going to put multiple tripwires throughout our network. And if an attacker wants to get to our critical data, then they're going to have to go through many, many, many tripwires in order to do so. So yes, there's a chance they bypass all of them. That's a very low chance. They'll trip one, and that's what we're going to use. So a nice visual graphic of this design is here. A is the open internet, B is the compromised internal network, C is secure services, and D would be the data. So just a different view at this. So these are all the things that are within the network. So everything you have, B would be your workstations, company laptops. C is your web server, kind of different management servers, and D is your data. So how we're going to do access control is we're going to put a VPN between these tiers. So for somebody to get access, and here we're talking about like management systems. So yes, if you have a web server within C, people on the internet can see the web server, but they're not going to see your management systems and management services on that box. So in order to access these, you have to go through these VPNs. So in order to get to C, you have to be in B and use this VPN to get to C. In order to get to D, you have to be within C and use the VPN to get to D. So this is something that's this is the tiered network instead of a flat network. And we're also going to use very strong authentication. So here we suggest 3-factor. You can use different types of authentication. We're going to use a password, a private key, and a token. Network access. So then we're going to put a firewall between all these. So as I said earlier, firewalls tend to, like everything else, are hard to configure. But now that we've segmented off the biggest portion of our network, we can more closely monitor this firewall and put in rules that are specifically necessary for the small set of servers that are behind it. So it makes the job of the sysadmin to put in a firewall rule much simpler, because we don't have, if you think of a network like Google, a firewall in an external network has to let almost all traffic in because they have a lot of different traffic within Google. But if you put a firewall where there's only 10 plus servers behind it, well, that traffic is much smaller. So you can better configure things like a firewall. So monitoring, we're also going to put monitoring in both C and D. This is the redundancy. So what this monitoring is going to do is we're going to put monitoring on the servers and the databases, and then we're also going to monitor the traffic that goes in and out of this. Somebody should not be exfiltrating 300 gigs of data in less than an hour. That shouldn't be happening. So we want to catch these kind of monitorings and catch changes to the file systems. So we're going to monitor on both of those. And then we're going to put honeypots. As we said, these things are great. Well, we're going to put them everywhere. We're going to put honeypots in every tier of our network as a way for an attacker to potentially hit and notify us that they're there. And we're going to put honey tokens, as I stated earlier, the kind of access kind of tokens on our VPNs, so that anyone that's trying to brute force their way into the VPN will hit this token, and then we'll notify that they're trying to brute force. And we'll also could potentially catch that off the network monitoring of the traffic. So testing this kind of design. So if we have an unauthorized access user on the network, so he's going to be sitting in the B, the biggest part of our network, but he's not going to have access to anything. He's not going to have credentials that he needs. So what he's going to do, he's going to scan the network. And what he's going to do is he's going to scan the network, he's going to see our honeypots, potentially other machines, and the VPN. If we make our honeypots juicy, he's most likely either going to target the VPN or he's going to target our honeypots. So once he starts brute forcing these, we'll know he's there. Or once he starts trying to access these, we'll know he's there. So they'll give us notification that he's there. So let's somehow he bypasses these and somehow gets access. He starts brute forcing the VPN and somehow guesses the password and username of somebody before he hits our honey token. It's possible. So now we'll take it from unauthorized access. So an authorized access user will log into the first VPN and be within C. But now what is he going to do? He's going to look for what's on the network again, and then he has multiple things he can target. He can target our honeypot. He can target our file systems, which have intrusion detection systems on them that will hopefully catch him. Or he could target the next VPN again, which the user he logged in as before might not be the same user that can log into this VPN. They're going to have different access. Least privilege is what applies here. So kind of really no matter what he does, he could be caught by many different services. So assuming he has, now we're going to assume he has 0-day exploitation and can stop our monitoring. So he still can't really do much. There's still a chance he attacks our honeypot. Even if he gets into our servers and we don't catch him, how is he going to get data? In order to get data, he needs to get down lower. So he's still not going to be able to have access to what he needs to have access to. So now let's take it that we have the highest privileged user. We have the head of the company who has access to everything because he wants his name to be able to get on everything. That guy's attacking us. So he now can get past both VPNs, but he gets into the databases. We have a honeypot there again that he could potentially target that database. I'm sure this person might not know that there's 3 databases there, which one is the honeypot. Or he can set our file monitoring service, or even if he wants to try to take data and throw it to a machine on the internet somewhere, our monitoring of the network is going to see that he's exploiting data at a high rate, or that all of our data is going somewhere that normally it's not regular traffic for this to happen. So we might also catch him there. So really, no matter what the case is of the users, there's a chance we're going to catch them in all of these scenarios. So caveats: theory is not reality. What we just explained here is a very simplistic explanation of a network. Google's network is much more complicated than what I just stated. So what we suggest is to apply this to this segmentation to different parts of the network. So you're not going to be able to just go in and apply it. So apply it to different parts of the network and use this theory throughout your entire network, and you'll eventually get to a secure network. Migration is hard. As security people, we normally don't get to design the network ourselves. We get hired onto a company or placed on a team that already had the network built. The infrastructure was already there. So kind of how do you target this? You can't go back in and change it all. That's a huge job that takes a lot of money. So once again, what we suggest to do is create a small zone that you test this in, document your process of testing this, get a few applications in, document it all, and then be able to send this to other people in companies so we can get it everywhere within the network. So this will help companies kind of move forward and slowly fix these old architectures that companies still have that are no longer secure. Other things you can do to help defend your networks, this is kind of a personal thing. Hire a penetration tester. Hire penetration from some of the bigger companies. What they'll do and what my job is to attack a company, tell them all the places where these attackers are going to get in, and then write a large document that states not only what the vulnerability is, but how to fix it and how to prevent these from happening in the future. So if you hire good pen testers, then you might actually solve a lot of your problems right away. Another thing you can use is there's a lot of new software out there, new technology they're very innovative and coming out. 2 of them are the 2 I saw here. So Drawbridge technology allows you to micro-segmentate your network. So like if you find an attacker within a certain part of your network, you can actually visually see your network within the software and just segment off that part of the network so he can't get anywhere else, just by drag and drop. So it's a very neat software. You can look into it. Another one is the designer of this presentation, Christopher Grayson, and his new product, website.io. This allows you to quickly and rapidly enumerate everything on your network. Even for companies like Walmart or Google that have a lot of things, you can quickly enumerate all of them and see exactly what an attacker would see. So by being able to look at it from this perspective, you can figure out what he's going to go after, how he's going to do it. You might even find things on your network that you didn't even know existed. So this is kind of new technology that is aiming at the same kind of concepts where I talked about during this presentation. So in the conclusion, the traditional approach just isn't working. I wouldn't be out of a job. Attackers wouldn't be making all the money they're making. We wouldn't have millions and millions of dollars going through these underground communities. This approach is not working. Yes, they do solve some problems, but they're in the big picture, they're not solving what they need to be solving. Our threat models is that we have attackers everywhere. Our tools are faulty. We lack the ability to really change our network, as there's always going to be people over us that say you can't do this. So we really lack the authority we need. And compromise can and will occur everywhere within our network, so we need to be ready for it. And then our proposed solution is that we have strong segmentation. We have tripwires everywhere within our network. We reduce the complexity of our monitoring networks, so we can reduce the false positives by putting a smaller amount of servers behind them so that they can be configured a lot better. And what was the last one? We have redundant controls everywhere so that if they don't trip over one specific wire, they can trip over others. Anyone have any questions about that? Yeah, you would think that. So what the problem is the attacker can only see, an attacker can exfiltrate a lot of information on your network and see a lot, but it's not as easy as you would think. So yes, an attacker can see that this machine is a Microsoft IIS 8.0, machine that's running this software, that's running this thing. But it's very hard for the attacker to know that that machine is not connected to any backend data. It's very hard for him. And there's actually if you can go look at research, other things, but there's very good ways at tricking the attacker. Chris was telling me the other day, because I was asking, like, what if somebody asked this question? But he was actually on a gig where he spent many hours on a box, like, I got this, he got in, he's got it, he's all excited, and it was a honeypot. So even if you don't catch the attacker and don't stop them, you're first of all going to waste their time, because they're going to have to figure out it's a honeypot. They're not going to just know by scanning the network. And you're now going to know they're there. So really the biggest part of the honeypot is that you have a non-false positive alert that says, hey, these guys are at least trying. And then, yeah, a bonus thing is you could potentially waste a lot of their time, which is always a nice thing to do.
So in other words, you catch the ball at the time these guys spend trying to figure out whether it's the real deal or not.
Yeah, and then you can go use that time to go kick them out of the network or try to stop them from going anywhere else. So, any other questions?
So what are your thoughts on behavioral-based antivirus, which is coming of age? So like the whole RI, that paradigm 2 or 3 years ago. The other thing I didn't see is my network access control. So NAC, I was wondering what your thoughts should have been on those two things.
Yeah, so for the behavior stuff, it's definitely an improvement. So it's definitely a different attack at applying this. But we actually look at like this. A lot of things happen like this. You can look at this in kind of a DNS context. So one of the teachers at my school teaches DNS security. A lot of these things, just like my example earlier, can also be tricked. So yes, I gave a very significant example of using a hash signature that tricks them. But even these kind of behavioral kind of access points, if they just change how they do things, or like a biggest example is kind of like if you put a testing environment and you're trying to test malware in an antivirus. Well, we did that for a while and attackers didn't know, and it was great. But guess what? Attackers figured out that, hey, these people are testing malware in a VM. So what they did is figure out, all they did is at the starting of their malware code is say, hey, am I in a VM? And if they're in a VM, stop running. So yes, these kind of theories are great and they work, but attackers are now at the point that they're figuring out how to get around them. So a lot of these things, I know I called a lot of these things not working. That is not the case. They will work, and they will stop a lot of unskilled attackers. They're just not really working against any sophisticated attacker that is most likely good enough to get to your critical data. So, and then NATs are obviously great. They're just another security access control. They do help, but there are also ways around those, and so they're just something I left out of this presentation.
Different attackers have different levels of ability, just like when you take the old-fashioned physical keys, some of them just break into a car, while those get more industrial strength, like Panther, try to bypass all the system, so I guess that's kind of
Right, and even on top of that, yes, they have difficult strength, but they actually do different things. So you would think that a lot of the pen tests we get hired for are just like attack this web application or attack this network. That's not always the case. A good friend of mine he specializes in physically attacking a company. So if you have a company like a bank, can he get to the vault? So they actually pen test these kind of things too. And a real life attacker can use all of these things in order to retrieve data about your company. So he's not going to just be attacking this one web application. He could potentially sending phishing emails. He could be trying to figure out more about your employees. He could go meet one of your employees, become their friend, and then take their password. Like these attackers aren't on the same line as just one single line. They only have one way in. They're using many of these approaches, such as getting past security, going in, creating fake badges, using social engineering in order to steal all your information from Facebook, in order to retrieve the information they need to get in a company. A common approach for a lot of people in pen testing is to actually enumerate employees based off their accounts on something like Facebook or LinkedIn. We can look through those, look for your name, and if it says you work at a certain place, well, now we have a bunch of names of employees. Well, we can use these names to create usernames. Usernames are usually first name, like first initial, last name, or last name dot initial. And if we have one contact within your company, we can see how your email is, how it's set, because everyone in the company is going to be the same way. If somebody has first initial, last name, and they send us an email and we know that's their email, well, most likely everyone else in their company is going to have that same format. So if we can get everyone's name in the company, we can now enumerate all usernames. So it seemed like getting the usernames was difficult, but now that was easy. So we can make things very easy by attacking things at different angles. And attackers are not attacking things in the simplistic case. They're attacking things from multiple angles all at the same time and using different tricks like this in order to get it. It's why we have the problem we do. Attackers are always going to be ahead. So as a head of security in an industry, you always have to assume they're ahead. And that's why we made these assumptions. These assumptions seemed very strong. Like, we're assuming we're compromised. Who assumes that? But we have to make these assumptions because the attacker is always ahead of us. They're never behind us. It's, as somebody that defends a network, you're always going to feel like they're ahead. You have to defend 100 ways into your network. They only have to find one. So no matter what you do, attackers will be ahead and use more different ways of getting in than you have to protect. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, so based on the complexity of the design that you have for how to protect networks and assets, in the event of, let's say, like you were talking about a zero-day threat, or you mentioned the bash issue, if your network is set up in such a complex way, what kind of flexibility or adaptability or agility do you have to respond to systemic challenges like a zero-day threat, where it's something that you didn't know about, that comes to light and you're immediately vulnerable all the way through? How agile are you with that kind of network to be able to then remediate the threat?
All right, so yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of, throughout this presentation, I assumed we had an alert team that was very good at catching these guys. So I was saying they triple wire, we give it to these guys, they go get them. So I kind of left that part out. But what happens here is we can use a lot of these tools. So I mentioned one earlier, the micromanagement tool. Well, if we know there's somebody on our network, we can actually segment them off. So hopefully we can use tools like this in order to quickly segment off the attackers so that they can't create these other backdoors. In a lot of different ways, I know this seems complex, but all we're doing is putting different networks within a network. So this is all the same management that you would do in a normal network. So just because they're segmented off, all that changes is your access authority. So yes, in a large company like Google, they're going to have hundreds. They would need more than 3 segments to accomplish their goal, and that would seem complex. But in the end, because they're segmented, it actually might make it easier because you know what you need to protect. In a flat network, you might be like, all right, I need to go protect this machine because it has a database on it. Well, in this kind of structure or setup, all you need to do is say, if I know an attacker can get all the way to the end, and I'm only really scared about them giving access to the big systems for now, in the immediate sense, I can block off that network as best as possible. So I can more reduce my problem instead of trying to target the entire network. I can say whatever my most special network is, let me just go concentrate on that network. So you can kind of even use this as a better way to approach the immediate response of that kind of attacker. And then use the rest of the time to kind of then branch out and figure out what they actually did while they used that vulnerability. But I actually think it kind of helps you better classify because you know where all your machines are. But yeah, that's a hard question that's probably beyond my expertise. Any other questions?
So you spent a good amount of time talking about the honeypot traps. So you detect someone through that honeypot trap.
Right.
What kind of remediations are there to then, prevent them from attacking your network?
Yeah, so this scenario is we're monitoring the network traffic. So we figure out, hey, they came from this machine. So now I can kind of get a tally of machines that are also compromised. So if they came from a machine on the network, and I go look at network traffic and I see that's where they came from, well, I can now know that machine is compromised. And then I can go look at even more and see, oh, maybe they came from this other machine. So they're pivoting within our network. So first it's going to let us better identify. It's not going to be perfect. In the best scenario, we'll know exactly where they are. We can go stop that system or shut it down or disconnect it from the internet. If I know they're on Joe's machine from accounting, the best thing for me to do, and I know they're only on that machine, is go in and unplug Joe's machine for now. Just take it off the network for now so I can figure out why they're there and figure that out in a secure environment instead of on my production network. But we can also just use it. What happens if they try to log into the system with a username and password? Since we're also monitoring, since we set up a fake thing that has authentication, if we figure out they logged in with a valid username and password, we can be triggering off that too. We can put a valid username and password within our honeypot and say, if they do this, then I want to know. So if they put in a valid username and password, well, we now know which account is compromised on top of that. So we can go in and use that knowledge in order to stop that account from logging into a VPN. Yes, we might kick one employee off the network for a little bit before we tell them to change their password, but we at least know more data than we would have. Without the honeypot, we really knew nothing. So it's really as a way just to leverage for us to use as a way to gain more information. And then really, as I said earlier, I kind of assumed we had a response team behind me being able to do this. That is really their job. Their job is to be able to take the information and stop the attacker. But what this design is going to do is give them as much information as possible instead of just giving them, hey, there's an attacker on the network. So we can use this as a way to kind of hand them at least an IP address, or they try to log in with this user and try to figure out exactly what's compromised.
Yeah, I wonder how they handle things like updates. You know, it's like you take Microsoft Windows, they constantly got to be updated like on Tuesdays.
Yeah, that's just a whole different. We're actually getting better at those things too. So that's actually a big problem within pen testing is we actually end up having most attackers get in through old software. So the first thing I'm going to do if I scan a network and I see you're on Microsoft IS 7, well, the first thing I'm going to do is see if I can figure out your version number. If you're on an old version number, then I'll be like, there's been plenty of vulnerabilities between now and then. So I can use one of those vulnerabilities to get in. So setting up a way to constantly update your machines is something that is very important in securing a network, because normally an outdated machine is the first attack vector of an attacker, besides brute forcing logins. Any other questions? Nope. All right. I guess if anyone has any questions, I'll be here for a little bit, so feel free to pull me aside and ask me any. Otherwise, I'll hand it back off.
All right, well, let's give him a big round of applause.